think everyone can hear me then. Hello, all of you. Thanks for joining us. I see quite a few familiar names in the list, which is terrific. Welcome back. And then a number of new people also joining us. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Herod Lang. I'm the Executive Director of PHAP, short for the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection. I'll be just very briefly kicking off this briefing session today and introducing my colleagues who will go through different aspects of the process. And then, of course, the feature for today is a discussion, an in-depth discussion with some guidelines and tips on item writing, which many or most of you have already tried your hand at, so great we can have the session together today. And then, of course, the recording will be available afterwards for everyone who is not able to make it live. So just to kick us off, you all know this. Some of you have been with the process now for almost a year. Others have joined more recently. It's very exciting now to be a year into this really intensive development process. The credentialing program and the certifications that are the key component of it in many ways has been 7 years in the making, but it was just 1 year ago that things really got off the ground and went into high gear through an intensive and great collaboration with the Humanitarian Leadership Academy and CHS Alliance. With their support, we were able to launch the credentialing program, and you'll hear first now from my colleague Marcus about the current status of development. So the development of certifications now has been in 2 phases, so you'll hear from him about the first phase and the second phase and the status of those. But just a quick word about the certification. So this is something, as I said, that was a discussion coming from a number of corners of the sector for about 7 years, if not more. And it was through this coming together of HLA, CHS Alliance, PHAP, and other partners that we were able to come together around this idea of a very flexible, modular set of certifications that are really in every way, in every sense, based in practice. So that's what we're looking at today, is how particularly the assessment component can be directly based out of, drawn out of practice and the experience of all of you. So now let me introduce who we have in our lineup then. As I mentioned, Marcus Forsberg will kick us off by giving us the status of development. Then we'll hear from Mariska de Keersmaeker. Many of you have been in touch with her for a while now about the next steps. So she'll just give a quick overview of the process for creating items, where we're counting on all of your input. And then we'll hear from Amanda Danis, who's the lead psychometrician, who has been working with us since the beginning of this development process. For those of you who were able to join one of the intensive meetings last year for item writing, she was the lead psychometrician in that process and then has been supporting us since then, also on analyzing the results of the beta testing and all of that work to really ensure that we have a reliable assessment that matches the criteria that practitioners laid out in the practice analysis. So we'll hear from her, and then of course we have plenty of time for Q&A. So at any point through any of these 3 presentations, please do mention in the chat if you'd like some clarification on something. We can be very flexible and pause presentations to respond on clarifications if there are any questions, and then we should also have plenty of time at the end. So that's enough from me. I will hand it over to Marcus.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me properly?
Yep, sounds good.
So I'll just very briefly go through the current state of where we're at, because you have joined us today. You're part of different certifications. We're currently developing. We've already launched 3 certifications and are developing 3 more for a total of 6 certifications, and they are so they're in two very different tracks in where they're at in the development process. And I'll just say a few words about that before handing over to Mariska. So for the first three certifications, launched in April this year, we have the Understanding the Humanitarian Ecosystem, International Legal Frameworks for Humanitarian Action, and Applying Humanitarian Principles in Practice. So these were all launched in April. The assessments are operational. We have started having several people taking the certification assessments. We also have all of the main supporting resources available. So the diagnostic test, the self-assessments, the study guides, and the information resources around it. So everything is live for these. So what we are doing here is that we're building on the experience of this first development process, and we're reviewing and improving the first assessment forms that are currently live. And we are also looking at developing a second form for these ones, so that it's to really increase the value for people who fail the first time around, so they don't have to wait for such a long time before retaking the test. That's the main reason why we would develop a second form, but also to keep ahead in case there is any security breaches of the assessment forms. So for these three, and this addresses all subject matter experts who are involved in any of the 6 certifications. So for you to get a better idea of what the assessments mean in practice, you're all encouraged to sit for a certification assessment if possible. And for most of you right now, you should be able to even sit in your own area if you're developing for assessments 1 to 3. But otherwise, if you're interested in any of the other assessments, you're very free to attempt those as well. So we're able to issue you a free enrollment key, so that you can do that for free. If that's not really possible for you right now, then we would still encourage you to at least sit for a diagnostic test, so you get a bit of a better idea about what the certifications look like in practice. Then for certifications 4 to 6, they will be launched in April next year, and they are in humanitarian needs assessment, cash transfer programming, where we're working directly with CALP, and monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning MEAL, where we're working with Lingos directly. And for these, the certification exam outlines are not yet completely finalized, but we have worked through the draft in several stages with the experts, and the verification surveys are currently out now to a wider range of practitioners. So based on the analysis of the results from the verification surveys, you'll see then in September whether you want to make any final changes to these outlines, or if you're happy with them as they are. I've entered a note there also as a reminder to please circulate these surveys. I'll post the links to them in the chat as well, but you all have received emails about these surveys. It's important that we get as wide a range of practitioners as possible to respond to these. So if you're able to pull on your networks to answer these, that's very much appreciated. So as we'll be starting the assessment development, I will be handing over primary responsibility for the development process to Mariska, who's here today as well. So the next stage will be to confirm your interest to her in taking part in the assessment development, and I hope that most or almost all of you will be interested in this. But some of you who will be directly involved in developing dedicated preparatory courses or resources might decide to do that instead of developing the assessment as discussed previously. So the development process for certifications 4 to 6 is starting remotely next week. And I think I'll leave it at that and hand it over to Mariska then. So
Mariska speaking. Hope you can all hear me loud and clearly. Very happy that you all can make it today. I'm glad to see some familiar names at least, because I've been in touch with a couple of you over the last month, actually, from the first 3 certifications at least. And as Marcus said before, I will be taking over, officially taking over the new 3 assessments in the next week or so. So what we're aiming to do in the next steps of the certification program, so going from July until October 2017, is of course creating new items. That is, in our case, items are multiple choice questions that we are developing to assess a certain amount of knowledge and capacities of our humanitarian practitioners in the field that we are assessing. So practically, if you are interested to contribute to the last 3 assessments that we are developing, please reach out to me and I will gladly assign you a competency statement, which is based on your expertise and on your knowledge. For the first 3 certification areas, this has largely been done already. Some of you might have already received a competency statement from me and are already developing items as such. So the first draft of the SME, or subject matter expert, as we call it, SME, it will normally, I will give you a deadline of 2 weeks in which you can complete your first draft of your 5 items. If this deadline of 2 weeks is not convenient to you, do not hesitate to let me know, and I will. We're very flexible with the timeline that you're able to provide, of course. So, in practice, after we've received your 5 draft items, we will go forward. I will first of all review with some other colleagues your draft items. Then your draft items, slightly modified, will go to your peers, to the other subject matter experts. Then they will come back to you. Afterwards, they will be reviewed by our psychometrician, Amanda, who will give you some more explanation later on about how to write a good item. And then, if needed, an additional discussion can be of use after this in our face-to-face workshop. But then in November until February, we will pre-test, of course, these items that you've developed, and we will use actual practitioners for this to see whether the items are reliable, good enough, whether the level is good, and then Amanda will come back to us and will actually review these items again after pre-testing with an actual audience. And after this, to finalize the items, we will pick the ones out that score the best, of course, and we will see what passing score or cut score that we will have for each and every certification based on these results. Okay, so that was a timeline that we had in mind. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them in the meantime. I will now give the floor to our psychometrician, Amanda, and she will give you some explanations on how to draft items. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm in the States, so it's morning time, so I'm still drinking some coffee. I think I see some familiar names on here, so hello to everyone that I know from past efforts for this, and I hope to get to meet everybody else in person eventually. So today I'm just going to go through a few item writing guidelines. I will say that Mariska has put together a great kind of like a study guide for the process with some tips, examples, what not to do, what to do, a glossary of terms, which is really, really helpful. One of the main terms that we should talk about first is the word item. instead of calling them questions, because lots of times in assessments, they're not actually formed as questions. They might be a statement where somebody has to rate how they feel about it, or it might be a graphical depiction, and then they have to rotate it depending on what it is that they're measuring. In our case, for PHAP, all of our credentials are assessed using multiple choice items. And so we just use the term item in this discipline rather than question to kind of catch all of those units of measurement. So if we can go to the next slide, I can start talking about, there we go. Do I have controls, Marcus? I think I do. Okay, sorry guys. I'm still on my second cup of coffee. So for process for creating items, PHAP is going to go through and assign different statements to you depending on your expertise and your background. You will create a first draft. We have an item writing template that I'll go over at the very end of my section of this. In that review process, which Mariska touched on a little bit before, she will do an initial review. We'll have some review by other subject matter experts. They will send it back to the original, who will get to incorporate their feedback or give their opinion on their feedback. And then a draft of it will come to me, and I don't look so much at the content because obviously I'm not an expert, but I will look at things like, can I answer it even though I'm not in the humanitarian sector, based on being a sort of test-wise. Are there things like consistency in the response options, all that kind of stuff. So the stuff that I'm going to talk about today are some of the things that I will look for as a psychometrician when I review the items. Then, if we still need to discuss it, and that's absolutely fine and expected, and we are more interested in a quality items rather than having this be a quick process, then we will get a chance to discuss all of them in a face-to-face workshop in Geneva. So after the items are kind of finalized and decided, you know, everybody checks off their boxes and says, yes, this is a great item, it is really tapping into what we want to measure, then it will be pre-tested with practitioners via an online process. All of those statistics kind of come back, that feedback, which includes how many people got it right, how many people got it wrong, what are their qualitative comments about the item, come back to me, and I get to work on them and decide which ones look good and which ones look, we're going to revise them a little bit more, and which ones can be used to build the final test form. And then, I'm sorry, my cat is hollering at me. So each assessment that we are doing is going to consist of 60 multiple choice questions or items, and we are looking to create ones with 4 possible response options and only 1 correct answer. And while the only 1 correct answer part seems pretty obvious, it sometimes is harder to do than you might think. So just to talk a little bit more about kind of the terms that we use when we're talking about building a multiple choice item, the first thing that we have is the STEM, which is the beginning part. It usually poses the question. It might include a scenario or a problem to be solved. One of the things that we want to focus on in these assessments is really looking at scenarios that you have encountered in your lives as practitioners or that you have heard about, and that way it makes it very realistic and relatable to the test takers. So we really do want to focus on some good scenarios in there. Oh, Marcus is noting for the first 3 certifications, those are 60 items. We might find that the new certifications might need to be a little bit longer to cover all of the content that they are designed to cover, and that has yet to be decided. In addition to the STEM, you also have your response options. Again, we're going to have 4 response options with only 1 correct answer. And the correct answer cannot really overlap with other ones. So you can't have a response option that is just more correct than another one. In this case, we are really going for only 1 to be a correct option, and then the other 3 are called distractors. Usually the first and second distractor are relatively easy to write, and that third distractor is very difficult to write a good one. That makes sense, is logical, but is just not correct. So here we have an example from your study guide that Mariska had put together for you. So you have the STEM, which is the question, basically creates a very brief, short scenario, and then asks the question that you need to answer. So your response options here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Response option 2, in this case, is correct. 1, 3, and 4 are the distractors. And you can see that all of the response options, none of them are extensively much longer than the other ones. We like to spell out all of our acronyms within our items. And all of these have kind of the same sentence structure, and they are phrases. So we don't have 2 phrases and then 1 full sentence. So you want your response options to kind of look like each other for consistency's sake, and to not draw somebody's attention to one more than the other. Sorry, I'm trying to keep track of a little bit of the chat to see if anything comes up right now, but we can have general questions at the end as well. So we really want to try to avoid the complex multiple choice format of A and D, A and C. The reason for this is that we really want our multiple choice items to really tap into what we're trying to measure, which is the practitioner's ability to perform the tasks that we are testing, or to hold the knowledge that we are testing. We don't want to also be testing critical thinking skills, reading comprehension. We kind of don't want that to muddy the water of our measure of the person's ability as a humanitarian aid practitioner. And when you get into having these multiple choice, really complex formats, you see them sometimes if you take some standardized testing like we have in the States and the SATs, and they have A, B, and C, B and C, A and C only. And it really detracts from the test taker's ability to answer the item correctly simply based on their ability that we're trying to measure. It also tends to measure things like critical thinking, deduction, even induction at some point. So we want to try to just steer clear of that. Minimize examining reading time and phrasing each item. A lot of times this will come out review by the SME or by PHAP or by me, in that we will see a long scenario and we'll think this is a great scenario, but we can kind of just reduce some of the details or reduce some of the language to not be quite verbose, so that we can kind of make the test taking time efficient, right? Avoid trick items. We're not trying to mislead or deceive our examinees into answering incorrectly. Again, we really, really need to just tap into that ability and that knowledge that we're trying to measure. We have the ability this time around and last time to use images, videos, and audio in the items, either in the stems or in the response options. So if you come up with a scenario and you think a picture would really help, or even a video or an audio recording of a speech or a brief one would help, you can simply describe that and write that into your Word template so that we can kind of flag that for a little bit more research later on. Okay. Next, we have each item must directly be linked to one of the statements in the assessment blueprint. What's going to happen after the validation surveys comes back is that we will finalize the test outline. And there are several ways of describing this. Test outline and exam blueprint, content outline. Basically, it outlines exactly what the test is going to cover. And the blueprint will even have numbers associated with it, weightings, if you will, which I will calculate using the validation surveys to come up with how many items need to be written for each statement, for each content, for each topic. And so what happens is sometimes we get some items and we're like, you know, this kind of measures this thing that is kind of outside the scope of the certification. It's not really pinpointing what we want to measure with a specific statement. So we also want to make sure that the item can be mapped directly back to the statement for which it was written. We do want to avoid trivial material. We want to make sure that it maps to the statement and that it measures something significant about that statement or that piece of knowledge. Here we have an example. You know, which year was the cluster system first implemented? Is that a really necessary piece of information for a practitioner to be successful at their job? That's kind of the question that I will come back and ask PHAP or ask any other clients that I work with. How necessary is this information for the job that we're trying to assess right now? You want to focus on a single issue or topic in each item. Each item should map to one and only one statement once you get your assigned statement. You want to make sure you're not trying to cover too much in one item. That gets into the complexity of a multiple choice item issue again. Keep the vocabulary at a consistent level. Avoid queuing one item with another. You have really no idea in which order the items are going to appear. And so we are not doing what's called testlets, which is where there's one scenario and then there are 4 or 5 items that go to that scenario. So each item should be independent of each other. This is a tricky one in this sector, to avoid items based on opinion. It's an important one. It's one reason why we have multiple subject matter experts weighing in on the items to make sure that it's not an opinion based on either geography or background. And so we have some checks and balances in there to take care of that. Another important one that has come out of our original item writing efforts from before is to be aware of different understandings and usages of terms in the sector, in different parts of the sector, and to craft the items accordingly. Again, this is why we have those checks and balances of different subject matter experts looking and making sure that one term will mean the same to all test takers. We don't want them to be confused or to affect their ability to do well on the test simply because they interpret an item word differently than somebody else. So here is an example. You want to keep the stem as simple as possible. You want to state the sum in a question form rather than completion. You don't really want to do the fill in the blanks. And lots of times, if you come up with this item of fill in the blank, and that's originally how you just it just comes out, and that's how you type it out the first time, a lot of times you can go back and you can use the study guide or the slide deck and say, okay, I wrote a fill in the blank. How can I turn this into a question? And as you can see here, in number 2, instead of blank is the month that receives the last sunlight, in fact, you could just write which month receives the least sunlight. So it's usually fairly easy. You just have to kind of wrap your brain around turning it into a question. Oops, we have a blank slide in there. Sorry about that. We're going to try to apply, your required knowledge and capabilities in the scenario real-life story that I talked about earlier. This makes it easier for the test taker really to relate to it rather than it being some sort of just a fact-based or text-based statement. So we really encourage the use of scenarios. And again, kind of like if you write a fill-in-the-blank question, it's your initial reaction. If your initial reaction is to write a knowledge statement, not in the form of a scenario, a lot of times you can go back and say, how could I put this into a scenario that would really still tap into what I'm trying to get to? You can try items such as, if something blank, 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 then what happens? What is the consequence of something? So they have to kind of think through the process a little bit. Or what would happen if X, Y, and Z occurred? Then they're using a little bit of their prediction ability within the scenario to answer the question. You can ask the respondent to make a decision based on some criteria that you present in that scenario, or they can choose criteria to use in making a decision. And this kind of taps into some evaluating knowledge. They can also use a combination of recalling, summarizing, predicting to evaluate and solve the problems. But again, the thing that I caution about doing this is that even when you're trying to get to the higher order of thinking, make sure that you're not incorporating multiple content topics and multiple statements into one item. That's one thing to keep in mind at all times. So again, we will be using items with 4 response options. Please go ahead and place them in logical or numerical order, but if we find that that is not the case when we get the items, we can revise them, but it usually will kind of occur to you in that way anyways. Keep your options independent. If options are overlapping, it is a quick clue to test takers that have been doing this for a while or have taken other tests that those 2 items cannot be, neither one of them can be correct if they are overlapping in knowledge. You do want to keep the length of the options fairly consistent. I talked a little bit about that before with some examples. And again, You want to avoid distractors that could clue test-wise examinees. If it's just totally crazy and absurd or semantic, one of the things that is my big test when I look at an item is that for most of my clients, if not all of them, I'm not a content expert. And if I can answer the question or I can get rid of one or two response options just because they don't even make sense, then they are not good distractors. And again, this goes along the same lines as trying to avoid complex multiple choice items, and you want to try to avoid determiners such as never and always. Once in a while, I think it can suit the question, but we do want to avoid that as a general rule. I only have one guideline for correct options, and that is to make sure there is one and only one correct option. Again, this is a little bit harder than it might sound. You'll find out when you get into it. So for those distractors, again, the first one is usually easy to write. The second one is fairly okay, and that third one can be a trial. And a lot of times when another reason why we have multiple subject matter experts looking at these is that sometimes there'll be one or two distractors that the original item writer comes up with fairly easily, and then they just get stuck on that third distractor, and that's why we use multiple steps in the review process, because lots of times a different set of eyes can come in and look at it and say, oh, I can think of this distractor fairly easily. So it really is a group effort on a lot of these. You want to use plausible distractors, familiar yet incorrect phrases, nothing too crazy, nothing too absurd. You can use true statements that do not correctly answer the item. That's an important one, especially in your practitioner field like yours. And unfortunately, we do want to avoid the use of humor when developing options. Although it might make the rest of us smile while we're reviewing them, we don't really want them to be in the final test. So since I'm a testing expert, I like to give little pop quizzes. So we have a poll down at the bottom, and you can type in your answer as we're talking about this. Based on what we've talked about so far, and if you've had time to review the guide that Mariska put together, what is wrong with this item? There are a couple things, actually. California contains the tallest mountain in the United States, has an eagle on its state flag, is the second largest state in terms of area, was the location of the gold rush in 1849. Anybody want to take a guess at what the problem is with this answer, with this slide? We have an answer over here in chat. There's more than one correct answer, I suggest. So what the problem is with this one, right off the bat, is that the stem should state the problem. So right here, we just have California, and it doesn't even really grammatically make sense. So we want it to be in the form of a question. What is the main reason so many people moved to California in 1849? Gold was discovered in Central California would be the correct answer. So really this changed the entire concept of what this question is, but it is still getting at the knowledge statement or the knowledge point that we wanted to cover, which is that gold was discovered in Central California. And we have another one. What's wrong with this item? The United States should adopt a foreign policy based on A, a strong army and control of the North American continent, B, achieving the best interest of all nations, C, isolation from international affairs, D, naval supremacy and undisputed control of the world's sea lanes. Does anybody want to take a guess at this one? More than one possible answer. So for this, the problem is that a lot of these up here of the four response options could be seen to be based on opinion or somebody else's opinion. And so we need to be more specific and cite the reference. According to Alfred Tree Mahan, the United States should adopt a foreign policy based on which of the following. So we're attributing back to the reference because I think that most of these could be argued for or against depending on what your opinion might be. All right, so what's wrong with this item? Which city has the highest average temperatures? Punta Cana, Macapa, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, I don't think, Nassau, and London. Ooh, no season specified. That's a good point. Is this a pub quiz? Anybody else want to take a guess? Yes. So we do have an implausible distractor in here. Obviously, London is, we can just throw that off right off the bat. So you really want to be able to throw in some really good distractors in there. And I actually don't even know the correct answer to this question. All right, so for the item writing template, this is what it will look like depending on which certification you are assigned to. You in here will, these are tables made in the Word document, so you can type however much text you want, and the table will just expand as you go. And don't worry about formatting and neatness and stuff like that. Sometimes Word can be a pain with that. You'll put in your name up here, the domain and subdomain, which will be assigned to you. You'll write your STEM in this section here, response options 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then down towards the bottom, you'll denote what the correct answer is. And then there's quite a large section for notes, comments, and references. And in here, we really encourage you to write anything that you want to say about this item, whether you're speaking to me, speaking to Mariska, speaking to the next subject matter experts that come up, some references, links to sites online, links to audio or images or video that you might want to use. Basically, that bottom section is kind of the catch-all for all the stuff that isn't already covered. And it can be very informal, bulleted. You can talk directly to us and say, I'm not sure about this item, or what do you think about this? Or I came up with 3 distractors, but I don't really like the third one. So does anybody have any questions regarding the template? And as always, I'm sure Mariska will tell you, whenever you have questions, contact her or me directly. It's fine. We are here to help you through this process. Any general questions or specific questions for me?
Yeah, so it looks like there are a few questions coming in. So first of all, I'll quickly point out the example questions that that Amanda was using. Of course, those were just generic questions from other subject matter areas, so they weren't meant to be linked to any of the 6 certifications that we're working on together.
There are some very good examples in the study guide that Mariska put together that are content relevant.
Yes, exactly. So there's a question here about length of the stems. So Sarah was asking about a character limit. So there's no character limit strictly, but Amanda, do you want to say something about length of the different components of the items?
Yes, I would like to say that we don't want there to have to be too much reading time on one item versus another. So even when you're setting up your scenario, just to try to keep it to short paragraph lengths, I would say. And it's always something that, especially in your first draft, if you write more than you think is maybe practical, we can always work through that later and kind of work to reduce the reading time and try to make it more succinct. So right now, I think the important part is to get out the content of the scenario onto paper, and then you can go back and review to try to shorten it a little bit. We just want to make sure that we're making an efficient use of the test taker's time.
Okay,
sorry,
great.
there's no solid answer there. The famous psychometric answer is it depends. And so it depends on the scenario and how much you're trying to cover.
Great. Yeah, sorry, Marcus.
mute there. Just on that. So there was also a question on the amount of time people have per question. That's of course very related to that.
Yes, that's what I was getting to, Marcus. So it's 1.5 minutes on average per item that people have. So it's a 90-minute test for the 60 items. So on average, 1.5 minutes each. Yeah, so that the duration of the test has been modified to allow for, well, the majority of test takers not having English as a first language. So for native English speaking audiences for an English language test, I think the advice was to go for actually a 45 to 1 hour minute test. For this length of 60 items, but now it's essentially been doubled just to ensure that fluency in the language would be not such an important factor in terms of a person's ability to answer the items. But the short answer is, as it's set up, it's 1.5 minutes on average per item. Let's see, there was another question. And this maybe, so Amanda might have some insights on this. It might also be something that Mariska wants to come in on. So Javed's question, wondering about, Javed is working in Pakistan and a particular refugee response context, and is wondering about whether items that he drafts should be relevant to a particular region or a particular context. Maybe, Mariska, do you want to come in on that with any thoughts about how one might generalize from their experience? And then Amanda, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, sure. It's an excellent question because, as Anharad was saying before, we are trying to make the questions more practice-based, and we are trying to really get out the experiences from our SMEs and make all these professional experiences be reflected in the assessments as such. So I would suggest, if you're writing on a particular area, that it is indicated well in the STEM what area you're talking about, and also for people that haven't maybe been involved in the region, give all the necessary information about the specific area you're dealing with, just so people that have been working in different areas in the world aren't disadvantaged as such. But I would say, yes, write about your practical and professional experiences of yourself, of your colleagues, the more the better, I would say.
Yes, definitely.
Yep.
And just so Amanda, did you want to come in at all on that question regarding how to use specific experience and make it generally applicable?
Yeah, I would suggest again, using this template, drafting even just your first instinct of here's the situation, here's how it happened, and what I did, and in that specific region, and then stepping away and then going back for your first review of yourself before you might send it on and say, okay, is this really too specific, and how could I possibly make it more applicable to other regions and people taking it from other regions? And again, I sound like a broken record, but this is why we have multiple subject matter experts really looking at these, and not just me or Mariska, so that people can look at it like any other test taker would, and not being from a specific region. It's really kind of that checks and balances in there. And then sometimes if you get stuck on how to, I think it's a really good scenario, but is this too specific to my region? Then that's where you can reach out to your colleagues and to us and say, how can I possibly, improve this? I think it really gets at what we need to measure, but I'm worried it's too specific. And that's one of the things that we're going to run into, and we can work together all as a team to improve it.
Yeah, excellent. And for those of you, I know there are a few people who are listening in on a phone line. Just to give you a heads up, we'll turn to you in just a couple of minutes and unmute all of you to see if you have any questions you'd like to pose. So do be ready to jump in when we unmute you in just a moment. In the meantime, so one point of clarification, and then I'd like to pick up Konstantin's question and pose that to Amanda. The point of clarification, so Rosemary had brought up the preparation time. Just to make sure, so the 2 hours that I think was mentioned was the 2 hours that we were giving as a ballpark amount of time for one of you, so for a subject matter expert to draft 5 items. Whereas a very different story would be the preparation time required for an individual to prepare to take the certification assessment. So that would depend very much on the experience and the level of that individual, but it could take anywhere from a couple of days to really a couple of weeks or even a couple of months, depending on how much preparation they need to do and how much they've already picked up on the job. So those are two quite different questions. And the guidance in terms of time frame and preparation for those certification candidates, that comes to them through the diagnostic process. So that's the support tool that's available to help them with that. But then to come to Konstantin's question there, is asking, Amanda, is there a possibility to have a series of related questions? For example, a STEM in the first item presents a scenario and several questions to the same scenario. Over to you, Amanda.
That is a good question. And at this time, the answer is going to be no. Is that correct, Marcus? We're not going to build, those are called testlets. And sometimes you'll see them in really lengthy, like reading comprehension tests where they have this long passage and then you answer a bunch of questions about it. But at this point, the way that the tests are constructed, we are not going to have testlets. Each item needs to be independent of the others.
Yeah, I echo that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that, so we have started in a very limited way to explore what that might look like for future certifications, where there might be really a case for going in some depth through a longer scenario. So it's something in which there's some early exploration, but no, at this point, that's exactly right. No, was the term testlets, Amanda?
Testlets, I hadn't heard that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and from a psychometric side, there's actually some pretty complex scoring issues that go along with if you're going to incorporate testlets.
Right.
Do you want to weight them? Do you, if they just, the initial problem with testlets really quick, because I think people probably would like that from a writing perspective, but it's hard because if you present one scenario that somebody cannot relate to for whatever reason, then they are basically out of luck for a whole set of items rather than just one. And so we really want to kind of not create that bias just yet, unless we do want to get into more in-depth stuff. And then in which case I get to have some fun in doing formulas and algorithms for scoring. So maybe we can work on that in the future.
Right. Yeah, so a question for Mariska, I think this is from Sarah, regarding whether there's a specific amount of questions you'd like to have per individual, whether they can come up with as many stems as they might have in mind.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for that question. Excellent question. Normally, we're aiming for 5 items per expert because we don't want to overburden you. But if you want to take on more items or even work on more competency statements than one, then you're, of course, very happy to just drop me a line and ask, and you can, of course, write more than 5 items as such, but normally we're aiming for 5 items per expert.
And additionally, quickly.
Can I come in on that? Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, just on the number of items. I mean, that will also differ a bit from group to group, in that it depends a bit how many experts there are in each group, and the length of the assessment. For example, for a longer assessment with smaller number of experts, we would need more items from everyone.
Yeah.
But it would be flexible. There's at a minimum level at 5 as a minimum amount of engagement.
Yeah.
You'll find, I was just going to add quickly, sometimes you'll find, let's say you're on your 5th item and you write the straight scenario and you come up with the response options, and one of those response options, as you're writing it, kind of sparks an idea for a new item in your head. Please go ahead and jot down your notes, even use the item writing template or email Mariska or myself. Good items are worth their weight in gold. I mean, they're just hard to come by, as you'll find out. And I would encourage you that even if you only come up with a great stem and the correct option and one distractor, to still submit that. You know, don't just throw it to the wayside because it's not totally complete. We have a whole team effort here, and there's no reason why we can't have multiple efforts on the same item put it in different pieces. So definitely try to come up with your 4 response options, but don't throw away a good stem just because you run out of time to do extra response options or something. We will take it.
And Marcus, did you have something else on that?
Yes, just to really underline that don't hesitate to send in more items, to come up with more ideas. Even if we end up not using all the items for the assessment form, there are, on the one hand, they might be saved for future certification assessment forms, but there are also several different other usages for these assessment items, both for the diagnostic test, which is mirroring the official certification assessment, but we need separate items for those, so people don't get an unfair advantage on the actual test. So we can use them there, and we can also use them in the study guides and various preparatory courses to help people prepare. So nothing is wasted. So don't hesitate. Do not hesitate to send in all your ideas if you have more ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then sorry.
About multiple. Sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda.
I was just going to say the one about multiple but not linked stems on a certain topic. Absolutely. Multiple questions about the same topic. You'll be assigned competency statements, and if your expertise is really in one more than the other, we definitely want everybody from all different backgrounds to be writing items about the same competency statements. So try to spread your knowledge across those statements. But if there's one where you're like, I've got a ton of ideas about this one, absolutely go for it.
Yeah, definitely. So just to echo, well, I guess all 3 of my colleagues here, but that diagnostic test that several of us had mentioned before, that's that free tool that's available publicly. It's out there as a way for just anyone to test their level of competency in all the different areas. That will be a more valuable tool if it has more and more items in it. So it's really about building quite a powerful tool and free tool for the entire sector, and that's going to be one very important use for items in addition to using items in the official assessment. So just to really highlight that. We had a great question coming in from Charles, which maybe goes first to Mariska and then to Amanda. I'll just read it out here. So Charles saying, one of the issues in the humanitarian setting is the often difficult gray areas that humanitarians are confronted with. Hence, there's no obvious answer. How can those difficult questions with no clear answers but choices to be made get reflected in this assessment?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Charles. Thank you for that. As an example, I think the humanitarian principles and practice assessment is one assessment that actually has to deal with this issue a lot, because all the humanitarian principles are complementing each other, and they're meant to be used as guidance, so they're kind of complementary and sometimes also in confrontation with each other. So yes, there are sometimes situations where there is simply not one good answer. So how do you deal with that? That's a good question. Sometimes there is no agreement in the sector on how a concept is defined or how to deal with a certain situation. And in that case, it is always better to just acknowledge that there is no agreement, rather than just stating your own opinion and saying, but according to me, this has to be dealt with that way. It's always better to acknowledge the discussion rather than trying to solve it by yourself, so to say. Another good tip that I can give you when dealing with difficult issues is phrasing your STEM more in a way that is, what would be the most correct response in this particular situation. So in that way, you're not excluding the fact that other options might also be a tiny bit true, but you're actually looking for the answer that is most true in that regard. The door just slammed. Sorry about that.
I'll just add in, if there's more than one correct answer that exists out in the sector, not based on opinion. Let's say there are multiple methods or multiple ways to approach a situation or a scenario. I think that doesn't necessarily make the scenario unusable for us. And then the key is to only list one of those correct methods or one of those correct approaches in your response options. So the rest of them have to be wrong. You don't have to include all of those correct answers, but from the options that they have in front of them, there can only be one correct one presented in that group. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Marcus, did you want to say something on this?
And I mean, just another practical tip is that if you find yourself with an item about something that simply does not have a right answer, it can be challenging, but it might be a good idea to try and think of the competency that you're trying to measure and think, is there a different way simply to approach this one? I mean, for the development, especially of the principles assessment, that kind of issue comes up all the time. So yeah, you need to think creatively in those situations as well, about just what is actually the sort of core of the competency that you're trying to assess, and try and craft the STEM accordingly.
Okay, so I'll add in my 2 cents as well. So just building all of the rest, this is really one of the essential questions, Charles, that comes up all the time. So it's a constant struggle, but an important one. I would say, yes, you can look for different angles in. You can also look at different ways to give more context. So to put it on a certain actor, or in other ways, give more sort of rigidity to the specific context that you're asking about. You can also, if you have an issue where maybe there are actually 2 very distinct approaches to a problem in the sector, or 2 very distinct understandings of a concept or a problem, you can raise up a level of abstraction. So you can actually reframe the item to be asking about knowledge, or you can reframe it to be asking about that difference rather than asking about just one understanding, if that makes sense. So to kind of raise it up a level. A couple of questions that came in, maybe good to pop over to you, Amanda. So Javed asking, should every distractor be relevant to the scenario in the STEM? So that's one question. And then Jonathan asking about what mix of positive and negative STEMs we should have.
So the first one, I am emphatically nodding yes. They should definitely be linked to the scenario, because if they are not, then I would assume that it is incorrect. So that's where the tough writing comes in, is coming up with those good, plausible, logical, but incorrect distractors. And then I'm not really quite sure I understand the question about the negative versus positive scenarios. negative as in negatively worded, or negatively as in negative outcomes, like for the humans involved in the scenario? I'm not really, sorry, could you clarify? That was Jonathan's question.
Yeah, maybe Jonathan can clarify. I mean, so one possible interpretation would be kind of a negatively framed question. So which one of the following would not So yeah, so that would be something that we try to avoid. It can be very difficult to avoid, but we do try to avoid as much as possible negatively framed questions. So which one of the following XYZ? Sometimes a few of them get through. So for those of you who have taken the certification assessments or the diagnostics, you will likely have seen a few negatively structured, like not questions. But the ideal is to have 0. But they are problem scenarios or happy scenarios.
So, but to touch on what Herod was just saying, she's absolutely correct. We want to avoid the which one of these are not correct. And it's hard because sometimes those are much easier to write, because it's easier to come up with 1 wrong answer and 3 kind of okay answers, like for those scenarios we were talking about that had multiple correct options or multiple correct methods or approaches. And so a lot of times, though, if you see that and you write it that way at first, you can go back and say, how can I kind of reverse the situation and come up with some incorrect answers and change it around. But as far as problem scenarios versus very happy scenarios, the humanitarian space has a lot of both, I would imagine. And I think a good portion of each is acceptable as long as they are relevant and relatable to the test taker. I don't know. I would defer to my PHAP experts here. I suppose I don't want any test takers to come out of it.
I agree, Amanda. Yeah, to come back on Jonathan's question, I agree. I think we're...
Yeah, I think if it's relevant, it's okay. But, you know, of course, you don't want to really make it more depressing than necessary. However, I think to be realistic, you're going to have a good portion of problem scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. I would echo that, Amanda. Just whenever you think it reflects the sector and the actual work of humanitarian practitioners, I think that's key.
Marcus, yes.
Yes, and very quickly on that, certain competency statements you'll find are focused more on negatives and some more on positives. You'll have some more focus on identifying best practice, while others are more about identifying challenges and problems. So that will, of course, also impact a bit the balance of the questions for those.
Great. So let's pause now, and can we just temporarily unmute everyone on the phone in case... Oh, okay. So we'll just give that person a moment and unmute them. So if you are on the phone and you'd like to chime in with a question, please feel free. Okay, so we'll still, so if you're on the phone and you'd like to come in, feel free to just interrupt, but we will stop our pause now. Let's see, so Marcus is going to come in on Ruth's question. I did also though want to, there's just a quick one to pop over to Amanda again about, so Rosemary, wondering if anyone else finds the process really time consuming. Amanda, do you have anything to say about how much time it takes to write a good item?
No, I don't have anything good to say about it. It depends. it's my famous answer, right? It depends on the competency statement. It depends on your experience. It depends on which number item you're on. So the first two might take you absolutely no time at all, and you struggle through 3, 4, and 5. Maybe you come up with 7 right off the bat, and 8, 9, and 10 are difficult. I've done a lot of item writing in my past, mostly for cognitive ability, deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. And sometimes your brain is working in that way, and sometimes it's not. So I don't recommend spending too much time staring at the computer screen. If you sit down and it's not coming to you, get up, take a break, read some articles online. Just kind of, don't stress out too much about it. And don't struggle through a huge session where you sit there for for your whole 2 hours and you're like, oh my gosh, I only came up with 3. And a lot of times I find that when I do take a break and I'm doing something else, something will come to me, and I'm like, oh, and I run back to my computer and jot down a few notes for later, and that's totally fine. And I think even looking at some of your listservs that might come through your email, or reading some articles, or even Facebook, or some relevant association stuff that you might read might help spark some items along the way too. So just don't stress out and just sit there staring at the computer screen. It will come to you. You are practitioners and experts, and the knowledge is in there. We just have to tap into it.
Yeah, and I just wanted to tap in on that and say, if you are writing items and you get to 3 items and you're really happy with them and you think they're really good, feel free to forward them already. If you can think of an additional 2, it's not a big problem. I can even give you some help and give you some guidance, and maybe it'll come to you afterwards. So that's not a problem.
Yep. Great. And I have one more thing to say before passing it to Marcus, just on this. Something we found was very helpful in the last round of item writing at the end of last year was to really do brainstorming with other people. So if you're sitting there trying to write items and then you're just trying to figure out what are the different angles that I can approach this question of say, humanitarian principles being based in different traditions around the world, it can be a really interesting conversation to try to spark with colleagues and get some ideas in that way. Over to Marcus.
Yeah, so just a comment on Ruth made a comment in the chat about it being knowing basic things. And just to clarify a bit on that topic, as it's quite key to your work. And this will be very familiar to the people who have been involved directly now in the exam outline drafting process, as the leveling of different statements is really at the center of that. But the certification outlines as a whole are all targeted at functions at the foundational level. And where that foundation, who that foundation is for, differs a bit. For the first 3, it's for basically for everyone. For certifications 4 to 6, they're all at a bit higher project management roughly level for those 3 ones. But then when you look at specific statements, many of them will be at the sort of foundational knowledge level, know the basics about X. Not phrased like that, of course, but several statements will be like that. But when it has been suitable, certain statements will be at a higher level and will not just be about basic knowledge. So look at the specific statement and see what is actually the competency and what level is appropriate for it. So don't assume that it's just going to be basic knowledge that we're trying to assess in there. I think that's it.
Yeah, and that actually I think links well to another question that just came in from Javed, asking should the object of the STEM be to extract data and information from the candidate. I think it's a really interesting way of putting it. I think for most of the competency statements in these outlines, the answer is no. There are a few that are just about you simply have to know. I think it was one of our example items in the presentation here. You simply have to know which state is legally responsible for the well-being of certain people on its territory. That's very much about extracting data or information from a candidate. But for the vast majority of the statements, in the way that they're phrased, the more appropriate item would be one that is not about extracting information, but is about assessing how the candidate's thought process works. So how are they able to sort of apply their understanding of the subject matter to different actual situations that relate to their practice. Someone who was maybe more expert than me in the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy and so on could explain in more detail about different levels of competencies and how those are assessed. Maybe Amanda, you would want to say a few words about sort of the distinction between, as Javed says, extracting knowledge versus assessing a kind of thought process.
Yes, and when I first read his question, though, I was thinking, yes, we are extracting information, but the information that we are extracting is how well can you apply your knowledge, right? So we're trying to tap into that application of looking at criteria in a scenario and making a decision, either with what method you would use to fix it, or what is the next step you would take, or what is the next step that that project manager should do. So you're really not just asking for reiteration of facts. You know, one of the things that was an example of a trivial question about what year something was established. There are some knowledge statements that are going to be relevant and applicable, but in general, we want to emphasize that scenario-based type of question. A scenario might lead to some knowledge-based items that can come out of it, and vice versa. You might come up with a knowledge-based question and then say, how can I turn this into a scenario to really draw out that test taker's application of their knowledge?
Definitely. We have a question from Ruth about the structure for recertification. Do you want to take this one, Marcus, or shall I pick it up?
So just on that, to make it clear on the on the so all of these certification have an expiry and will need recertification. This is based on the principles that knowledge does deteriorate over time and reality changes. So you might need to learn new things as well, shockingly enough. But what is not sort of predetermined is how long this period is and how that recertification takes place. So for the three first ones, so based on these verification surveys that were sent out to practitioners, it was decided that the period should be 3 years, and also that there would be two different ways of recertifying. So either sit for the assessment again, or otherwise, and this we would assume most people would follow instead, would be to take part in a continuing education program. So taking part in a selected number of sessions of a wider range of recommended learning opportunities. Exactly how this is structured for the new 3 certifications, that's not decided yet. So that will be decided in September. But yes, there is a recertification element to it.
Yeah, and maybe yeah. So just to quickly build on that, so the validation surveys. So the validation surveys for the first 3 certifications went out last year, and now we have the 3 new certifications. Those validation surveys are currently out and live. Marcus posted those links earlier. What you'll see in those surveys is they are not only asking about the practical importance or the practical relevance of each of those competency statements, but they're also asking I don't know if it's for each domain or maybe it's just at the end, but in any case, there are also questions about with what frequency does the required competency change? And so it's the responses to those questions about how the required competency is projected to change over time and how practitioners feel it's changed over the last few years. Those the responses to those questions are what then has to inform the length of the validity of the certification. So those decisions about how long the certification is valid, they're taken by what's called the Certification Commission, which is the governance, independent governance body for the certifications. But the commission takes those decisions really just based on the results of the validation survey, which are then analyzed by psychometricians such as Amanda. Yes, and Amanda is also saying that recertification is required for certifications that are accredited under the ISO standard. Yes, and these certifications that we're all developing together are intended to be ISO compliant, and we're expecting an audit actually at the end of this year. And so then hopefully we'll be able to joyously announce in the beginning of 2018 that we've passed the audit and that all of these certifications then retroactively will be ISO 17024 accredited. Let's see, were there any other questions that we missed? So we're starting to wrap things up. So if you have other questions on your mind, please do at least start typing so we can see that that there are some more questions coming. So yeah, so Ruth. Oh, I see. Yeah. So Ruth is asking about the relationship between academic programs and the and professional certification. It's a really good question. So we've started some discussions with some of the more practice-oriented master's programs. The conversation that's progressed the furthest at this stage is with Deakin University and their humanitarian leadership program. And what they're looking at is so they're looking at the level of the certifications and how they relate to their more academic program and building those in either as a recommended prerequisite or even a part of the program for the early stages of the program. For other academic programs, those conversations are still to be had, but there are very natural relationships that can be built upon between. It's a very different model, really, the academic model from the professional certification model. But the fact that they are so different means that they can be used in very complementary ways. Yeah, exactly. So bringing together that very kind of practice-based and practice-driven and created element as a component for more academic reflection. Great. Let's see. Ah, I see. Oh, I'm sorry, Javed. So we misunderstood your question, but actually it was really useful, I think, for a discussion. But sorry about that. But yeah, so you're actually asking about other information that would be extracted from certificates. So the privacy of data is of utmost concern, actually, on multiple dimensions. So this is it's foreseen. Really at all stages of the process, and it's an important part of the requirement also of the ISO standard that the privacy of certificates is of utmost importance throughout. So as I recall, there are some kind of demographic questions, very basic ones regarding years of experience. I think that's right, and possibly general region of experience. And those questions are in there so that then while the test is out there and running, we can periodically, and with the support of Amanda and her psychometrician team, we can periodically review the actual results of the assessments, not looking at the individual scores, but to look in aggregate at the scores for the purpose of making sure that, for example, say people who have all of their professional experience in a certain region, say people who have all of their professional experience in East Africa, if they are consistently answering certain questions differently from people who have all of their professional experience in South Asia, then that would be something that psychometricians would flag, and we would have the subject matter expert groups look at that when they do their regular review, because clearly then there's something biased about those questions which would need to be adjusted. So there are a few demographic questions that are asked, but there are important security protocols in place and processes and procedures to make sure that that's all kept safe. I don't know, Marcus, do you want to say anything about the platforms that we're using?
Yes, just very brief on that. So on the testing side, it's all conducted via remote proctoring, so meaning via webcam and your computer, and that means that all the test taker data sits with the platform, PHAP's platform. So there are no other agencies or organizations that are sitting on the test taking data. So how if you take the only data that will be handed out is if someone has a certification. If someone asks PHAP, does person X hold certification Y, PHAP will say yes or no. So there will be no information out about someone passing or passing, yes, but not failing. If someone takes a test and they do not pass it, we will not give out that information, and that's part of our procedures, and we will be audited on them as well. But for proving your certification, each certificant is provided with a digital badge, so a digital certificate, and this they can choose to keep private or they can choose to share it. That's up to the individual, and it's quite easy to set up those settings as well. So I think that's perhaps all I have to say on that.
Okay, great. Let's see, I think we're starting to wrap things up now. Let's see, Mariska, do you have any parting thoughts for everyone?
No, except for the fact that we're very grateful that you're willing to contribute to this very exciting efforts, and that I'm looking forward to be in contact with you all over the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Amanda, any parting thoughts from your side?
Good luck. May the force be with you. Please reach out with any questions, and please don't stress too much about it. Like I said, take breaks. Things will come to you. You know, I've been doing this for quite a while, and I think that really kind of letting these things pop into your head and thinking, oh, there's a situation, and you just jot it down on a piece of paper, really will lead to some great items. And I have confidence that we will have some awesome assessments come out of this. So thank you for all of your time and motivation.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Thanks for all of your help with everything and for the briefing today. Incredibly helpful. And we will, I know there were some people asking for the slides to have as a complement to the guidelines document, so we'll make sure that those go out as well very shortly. Now over to Marcus, anything to leave us with?
Well, just to say a big thank you to everyone for their engagement, and especially right now to the people who I've been working with for the past few months for the 3 new certifications. I'll be handing you over shortly to the good care of Mariska, so I look forward to your continued engagement in the development process there. So, but I'll be remaining directly engaged as well. So if there's anything that relates to the outlines, I'll stay directly engaged.
Okay. Very good. Thanks so much to all of you for being on the line. Those of you who are listening to this after the fact, thanks for listening through to the end. Thanks to Marcus, Mariska, and Amanda for your inputs in the session today, and also for Liz in the background for putting together the platform for us to have this great meeting. We had a lot of people on the line. So good, that's all from us. We're signing off from Geneva and look forward to being in touch with all of you again very soon. Bye-bye.